Morning,
And
Harry. Thanks for being here, all of you.
good morning, you are live.
Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order, and the first order of business would be to take attendance. Rachel, would you do that for us, please?
Yes, good morning. Chair Balducci,
Here.
Regent Guay,
Present.
Regent Santiago,
Here.
Regent Stewart,
Here.
Regent Yang,
Here.
Madam Chair Ryan,
Here.
and welcome to our ex officio Professor Blitz and student regent Carla Galesi. Thank you.
Thank you, including David and Carla. It's great to have you here. First order of business is to accept the minutes of the amended September 13th meeting. I would make a motion to that effect. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Second order is the October 13th meeting. I would make a motion that we adopt that, accept the minutes of the October 13th meeting as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Today's meeting is one that I don't look particularly forward to. The only action item we have today deals with the raising of tuition for the 24-25 fiscal year. And with that, we're going to end up dealing with the issue of how we're going to pay for the future for the next fiscal year of tuition. And we're looking at an issue that isn't easy to raise costs of education to our students. However, we had a $140 million deficit projected for fiscal year 25. And we're looking to see if we can get that down somewhere within the range of reason. Major causes, of course, are fringe benefits that have to be paid out, diminishing numbers of students, et cetera, although I understand we are on the rise with that. So hopefully we'll be able to make some changes that'll be beneficial to us. The deficit mitigation plan, which we accepted on the 15th of November, many of you were there. Hopefully you remember what we're doing, trying to balance our budget through that. And we're able to do that for fiscal 24 year, but 25 is a problem. We're going to end up with about $30 million in new revenue. That would be the 20 million we're looking for from tuition increases, along with other programs, et cetera. But the predominant portion of that new revenue would be tuition increase. There's going to be about a $49 million expenditure reduction, which includes personnel, dealing with new personnel, no new hires, not filling vacancies, and of course, taking action which will affect negatively adjuncts in our college and community college system. And about $20 million in reserves that we're going to use, we're calling it cash, that will help to reduce the entire problem, and will bring our issue of a deficit down from about 140 plus $150 million down to about $47 million. What we don't want to do, you have a couple of options, and what would those options be? One would be to cut another $20 million out of our budget, which would be a negative effect. It would affect programs, either cutting or consolidating. We'd start looking at hard layoffs, which I don't think anybody wants to see occur with our faculty and staff at our universities. The other might be to consider using cash reserves, which isn't good from an economic standpoint. It puts us in a precarious situation. We are using some of that money as we go forward, but only a small amount, so it doesn't have a major deficit effect on our budget as we move forward. Excuse me. I'm going to turn it over to Lloyd in just a minute to go through the nuances of this. But basically what we're doing and looking at is raising tuition at the universities about $612 a year, and at the Connecticut State Community College, $246 a year. So with that brief summary, I'll turn it over for the more finite points to our Chief Fiscal Officer. Lloyd, would you take over from me right now and
Yes,
begin, Mr. Blanchard?
I will do that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I have my screen published on screen. Do you see it? Can someone confirm it for me?
Yes, we could see it.
Yeah, we see it.
Great, thank you. Once again, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, and Regents, and invited guests. So this is our proposed plan for our proposal for raising tuition and fees for the fiscal and academic year 24-25. You will recall that at our June meeting, we had shown you our projected deficits for the current fiscal year 24 and for the next fiscal year 25. And we have spoken, as the chairman did earlier, about the very large deficit that we expect in FY25 of about $140 million. Just to put that in context, $140 million is one out of every $10 we spend. So it's 10%. That's quite a large deficit that we have shown you over the course of the last few weeks how we would plan to mitigate that deficit. How did the deficit get so large? Well, it got large for a number of reasons. We've gone over this on November 15th, but I'll review them for you here today. Of course, enrollment declines have been persistent over the last decade, and those declines were only exacerbated by the pandemic. And because of those enrollment declines, we face declines in tuition and fee revenues at all of our institutions. I mentioned the pandemic. It was a big effect. This was true across the nation, across all sectors of higher education, and we all received funds to help us through that time period. However, some of the one-time funds, not necessarily the coronavirus relief funds, but certainly the stimulus funds that were passed in Washington and distributed across the nation, were used for all manner of reasons. And in Connecticut, those stimulus funds were given to us in the form of one-time funds to pay for CBAC increases, to pay for permanent costs. And so when those one-time funds ran out, we found ourselves with permanent costs that continue, that recur every year. And of course, we don't have the one-time funds going forward to help support those costs. And finally, fringe costs. Both in general, fringe costs are expensive, some of the highest costs in the nation, highest fringe costs in the nation in higher ed, but also our deficit is impacted by the change in the methodology that OPM is using to allocate fringe costs. So state appropriations. So on the top part of this panel, you can see that we got a small, very slight increase in the block grant, right? You see the $11.8 million more in our state appropriations. But when it came to the one-time funds, you'll see it highlighted in yellow at the bottom. When it came to one-time funds, we lost over $116 million. And so because these funds were given to us by the state to pay for permanent recurring costs, once they take it away, it creates a lack of fund source for costs that continue and recur. I've shown this slide to you also before. This is a picture that describes the fringe costs from FY15 to projected FY25. You can see that in FY23, well, let me just say in general, the gray bars are the retirement costs. These are the costs that the state took on. The orange bars are the non-retirement costs. These are healthcare costs that are taken out of our paycheck, FICA costs, Social Security, those kind of costs that are taken out of our paycheck. That's what the orange bars represent. And the green bars represent how much CSU was able to use its tuition dollars to pay for those costs. in FY23, we paid only $54 million in fringe costs. But in FY24, the current fiscal year, that number went up by $75 million as a result of the fringe cost swap implemented by OPM. This was, frankly, a methodology change that was meant to serve and help UConn, but applying that same methodology to CSU really hurt us and created this $75 million impact in FY24 and this $82 million impact in FY25. So this is the mitigation plan we presented to you on November 15th to try to address that $140 million deficit. And while we will balance our budget in the current fiscal year, FY24, we have a very big challenge in FY25. And you will see on the screen under FY25 that we have submitted a plan that will mitigate 106 million of this deficit. Now, for Professor Blitz's sake, that $7.8 million is an update of our deficit. So the $140 million is improved by $7.8 million as a start. And then we look at the revenue that we're planning for about 29.8 million, the expenditure reductions that we're planning at 48.6 million, and institutional cash reserve usage at about 20.4 million. Of that 20.4 million, 15 million is CT States and 5 million is Western. But in FY25, this plan will balance all budgets except for CT State's budget, which will leave a $41.3 million deficit, and Western Connecticut State University's budget, which would leave about a $6 million deficit. And the combined 41 million for CT State and 6 million for Western adds up to the $47 million request that we will make to the state. You can see on the left the proportions that these cuts represent. Of this $29.8 million in new revenue, we had assumed that we would raise, some of that would be tuition and fee revenue, new tuition and fee revenue. And so if we increase fees, tuition and fees by 5%, which is what we are proposing today, it would generate 20 of this $29.8 million. So this is our recommended tuition and fee increase. You will see that the 5% increase applies to tuition and mandatory fees. The increases in room and food services, those will vary by institution, and you will see the institutional changes at the bottom of your screen. But on average, for our university students, we are proposing an increase of $334 a year in tuition, an increase of $276 a year in their mandatory fees, and I'll be more specific about those fees in a minute. And for those university students who are living on campus, we are proposing an increase in their room rate of $234 and an increase in their food service plan of $146. For our Connecticut State students in our community colleges, we are proposing a $216 increase in tuition and a $30 increase in fees. These increases are for the full academic year, fall of 24 and spring of 25, including the intersessions. This is what the new rates would look like if the proposal is adopted. The fees, I mentioned the fees. The fees include the university general fee, which is collected to help pay for all manner of activities, including student activities, extracurricular activities for students, and the university fee, which is the fee that we use to pledge to retire CHIFA debt. As you know, when we engage in capital construction, CHIFA, Connecticut Higher Education Funding Agency or something like that, they tend to handle the debt issuance on these projects. And this university fee is what we pledge to pay for the debt service. So you will see that the state universities are not quite at $7,000 in tuition, fees at almost $6,200, and you can see the room and the food service fees. And for Connecticut State, you could see that the tuition would be $4,608, and their college service fee would be $610. Charter Oak is facing increasing enrollments, so they do not have a need to increase tuition the way our other institutions have. So I want to talk about impact and how this proposed increase would impact our students. And I want to do this in a way to demonstrate that many of our students already receive aid, whether from the federal government, mostly in the form of a Pell Grant, or from the state, mostly in the form of the Roberta Willis Scholarship. Of course, each of our institutions have foundations of their own that raise scholarship monies that support their respective students, and you can see the rates to which that is true under private scholarships. And then finally, institutional aid. This is aid that comes out of the institution's own budget to support students to support their need. And some of that, I would imagine, is also merit-based aid. These are for our full-time undergraduate students. And at the bottom part of this table, you can see the averages of these aids for CSU as a whole or campus by campus. So you could see that just thinking about the federal and the state aid, you could see that our students do receive about anywhere from $6,000 to $7,000 in aid from the two governmental entities, not including other aids that might come through private sources and from including other aids that might come through private sources and from the institution itself. So you see that 43% of our CSU students receive federal aid, 23% receive state aid, and more than half receive some form of institutional aid. So any increase in tuition and fees certainly would create additional burden, but that additional burden wouldn't be borne in full because of the aid provided and shown here. Moreover, there are conversations being had at the federal level about two policy changes. One, there's always a conversation about increasing the Pell. So if the Pell grant is increased for students across the nation, it would certainly help ameliorate some of these increases. Moreover, I believe there will be some changes, though I'm not as familiar with the impact. There will be some changes in the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the form that you fill out for federal financial aid. And the idea is to simplify that form so that more students can participate in the federal financial aid program. And if more students do participate, then that would mean more federal aid would flow to the institutions where they attend.
Lloyd, can I just interrupt for just one quick minute, going back to the previous slide where you show this is the annual per
Yes, sir.
year. The actual numbers come out so that they understand it, that the Connecticut State Community College increase for that year 24-25 is actually $246 for the year, and that the state university increase for the entire year for both semesters is $610. Just to put it in perspective, since we have those up there at the present time, plus with your discussion now about aid, I think it's important that we have that number broken down as to what the actual increase is going to be at each one of the institutions.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. These that I'm showing now are the increases, the delta, right? And this is what it would wind up being starting in the fall. So these are the increases. So it's the increases are relatively modest if you think about it that way. But your point is well taken, Mr. Chairman. This next slide, continuing our conversation on the impact on our university students, the impact really depends upon how much aid they receive. I don't have this broken down by income levels, but those students who are more able because of their household income obviously would receive less aid generally, and those students who are less able would receive more aid. What you see on the screen here is really just showing how, one of the regents asked me a question: what does this mean for our competitiveness with other universities and colleges throughout the state? Well, Our students have the choices of going to either UConn, which is the other public institution, or a number of the private institutions in the state. And you could see here that our private institutions have very high tuition rates and cost of attendance, but they also, in many cases, provide very large levels of need-based aid. So what happens is that the federal loan indebtedness after they graduate is actually comparable to the loan indebtedness of our students who go to public institutions. Indeed, the very wealthy universities, Wesleyan, Trinity, and Yale, they leave debt levels of 20,000 or less, while others leave around 20,000 or more. But the debt levels for our students after graduation are not so different than the debt levels at UConn and the debt levels at the private institutions, many of the private institutions after they graduate. However, if you were to this is kind of the same picture, taking out the privates and really focusing in on comparing CSCU institutions with UConn. And I only want to do this to demonstrate that while our tuition levels, our cost of attendance is tuition, fees, room, and board and books, is still lower than our cousin over in Stores, but our cousin in Stores provides almost twice as much aid as any of our universities. And what happens as a result is that our students face higher levels of indebtedness after graduation than even those who graduate from UConn. So my point in showing this really is to show that tuition and fees remain quite competitive, even with the increase. The problem that we face, I think the problem that the students might want to focus on is the lack of aid, because it's the lack of aid that raises the level of need for loans and ultimately indebtedness. So this compares our university students to others, both within the state and public institutions throughout the New England region. You'll see that CSCU rate, even as proposed, which would be 13,457, still remains lower than all except Maine. Now, for our CT state students, half of them will not be impacted at all by the proposed increases in tuition and fees. Let me say that again. Half of our CT state students who take classes for credit will not be impacted at all because of the availability of grant aid, whether through Pell or through PACT. These numbers show statistics on the number of students who face different situations. So I'll walk you through this table. The first line in the table shows the number of students who take classes for credit. That's 36,000. And you can see the average household income of that larger pool of students. The next line shows students who received enough grant aid. That includes Pell, that includes work aid, work study aid, and that also includes PACT. Any grant study aid or institutional aid for that matter. These are the number of students whose aid covers all of their tuition and fees. 18,276 students. So we really are doing a good job providing the help for our community college students through the aid programs made available to them, including the most recent program in PACT and the expansion of PACT. You'll see that the income levels of these students who receive this aid are modest. Indeed, if you go to the third and fourth line, students who receive Pell Grants, almost 15,000 students receive Pell Grants, and those students come from families with just $31,000 in income. And students who receive enough Pell to cover all of their tuition and fees. Pell, of course, is a means-tested program, so the more need you have, the more Pell you get. And so you can see that those people with less than $20,000 in household income, there are 1,000 students who can pay for their community college education completely with the Pell dollars they receive. Students who receive PACT funds are about 11,500. Students who receive
Seems we've lost Dr. Blanchard's audio, so we'll give him a moment to sign back on. Rachel, would you send him a text, please? Thank you.
While we're waiting for him to come back on, I would just make another point, and I've mentioned it before, and I think it's important, and that deals with the articulation agreement that we had that definitely needs to be redoing.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, you had a question?
No, I was speaking while waiting for you to get back. I reiterated the point while we're looking at this, that we need to improve and help the articulation agreement so that students who are taking full-time classes know that those credits that they are taking are going to be accepted at the university, our university system. And if there are credits that are not going to be accepted, why take the course and end up spending money doing that? So I think it's beneficial for our students at the community college level to understand that. And I know Rye is going to be, and indicated he's going to be working on putting that together with the university groups so that we come up with the proper aid as far as acceptance of classes at the universities. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Lloyd. Maybe not.
Okay,
Here he is.
I think I faced a glitch. Can you hear me now and see me?
Yes.
All right, let me put my presentation back on the screen. Mr. Chairman, your point about the transfer articulation agreement so that as many of our students who want to transfer credits from community colleges to our four-year can do that. I recently approved the position for academic affairs to hire someone that would focus solely on that transfer activity so that we increase or maximize the number of credits then can be transferred from our community college to our four-year institutions. So this is a comparison, and the last slide, for our community college students relative to others in the region. We still are quite competitive with respect to others in the region. So we feel like this proposal, while never fun to raise fees and tuition on students, we feel like it is a moderate proposal that both helps solve the need that we have with regard to our mitigation efforts, but also is moderate in the face of aid that is provided either through Pell and PAC for our community college students or Pell and other forms of aid for our university students. With that, I'll stop and take whatever questions you may have.
Questions by members of the committee? Nobody has a question. David. And followed by Ted. David, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, unmute. If Ted wants to go first, I'll follow him.
No, you go. You go.
All right. I have a couple of points that I want to make, some of which have been partially responded to in Lloyd's quite interesting presentation. Firstly, the proposed percentage increases are not explicitly included in the resolution, making it difficult, if not impossible, for those directly affected to fully understand it. This is also the case when the resolution is posted at the required state repository, as it refers back to a staff report typically not included. So that's a problem I identify with the resolution. Secondly, the staff report does not contain essential information requested by FAC representatives and at least one voting member of the board at previous occasions for tuition and fee increases. Specifically, what is the effect of a 5% tuition fee increase on recruitment and retention? Without this, we cannot judge the consequences of the proposed increase and as a result, decide on its merit. Now, I realize that Lloyd has provided us with a number of comparative figures, but the question that I'm asking is, how many students, how many people out there, students as customers deciding whether they go to university at all, would be inclined not to go because of this increase, and how many who are currently students facing the 5% increase, whether mitigated or not by Pell and PACT, would decide not to continue. And that is not present in the staff report. Thirdly, while the resolution in its last whereas refers to tuition and fee increase as part of the mitigation plan, the one-page summary of the mitigation plan distributed at the last board meeting does not include this item under new revenue initiatives or any other category. Now, Lloyd has clarified that the sum here is something like $20 million, but I don't find that in the staff report. I don't find that in the resolution either. So those are concerns which I have, particularly with respect to what is the resilience of the market, as it were, of students for recruitment and retention, given this kind of an increase. We asked for that last time, in fact, the last two times, and it's still lacking. And it's very difficult, and I think impossible, to decide, therefore, whether this 5% increase is justified on that basis. And I think it should be returned to the system office for further clarification. I have other points with respect to how we got into this situation, but I'll save that for later.
Well, thank you, Professor Blitz. I think the question about the sensitivity of our students to increases in tuition and fees is a good one, but a very hard one to answer. And here's why. Each student has a unique situation as it relates to their need. And so each student has a different level of aid. And as a result, each student faces a different price, net price, to attend. So to be able to answer that question, we'd have to answer it for each of those various situations, which would be very difficult. And we would have to have knowledge of decisions made by people we have yet to talk to. So let me try to answer it this way. As an economist, I understand the idea of elasticity of demand, price elasticity of demand. So when prices go up, demand goes down. That is certainly true for normal goods and services. Higher education is considered a normal goods and service, or a service, normal service, but it is also one with very high demand. And because it has very high demand, economic theory would suggest that the response would be low. In effect, the elasticity would be relatively inelastic because of the importance of education. So that's why you see enrollments across the nation for the past 40 years continue to increase while tuition and fee rates have continued to increase across the nation for public and private universities generally. That fact is true only because of the very high demand in education. And that fact is true because of the very high returns and the very solid returns born of investing in education. Let me say this, whatever that sensitivity is, I can easily imagine that it would be more sensitive, more elastic for our students relative to UConn students or Yale students. So that would certainly be true. But the aid that they receive, the disproportionately more aid that they receive, our students receive, would offset that sensitivity. So when I show, for example, half of our community college students who probably are least able to afford students, half of them will face no impact at all. That's because of the design of the programs that are meant to keep the cost low for them. And so the students who are not receiving aid, as you saw on that same slide, are those who come from families who are more able to pay. So my argument here is to say that, yes, there would be some sensitivity both for new enrollees as well as existing enrollees through retention. There would be a response to an increase in tuition and fees. But the aid that we provide, the aid that the state provides, and the aid that the federal government provides offsets that to a large extent, if not cuts it in half. So I'm sorry I don't have a more detailed answer for you, but a detailed, specific answer would apply to each specific different situation. Thank you.
Other comments? Comment I would make, though, is that we do not have the 5% indicated in the resolve, in this resolution. You know what? And I usually read pretty well.
Well, so I mean, I don't know the practice of CSCU in raising tuition, but the tuition schedule is a detailed schedule. All I showed you on the slides is an average of those because there's a lot more involved in the fee schedule. You have the complete fee schedule, and if you choose to approve this increase, you are in effect approving the entire fee schedule. And we've shown in the fee schedule, we've highlighted where changes are made to aid your finding those data. But that they are not in the resolution, I think the resolution really simply calls for approval of the proposal, and then the staff report and the fee schedule provide the details to support that vote. Ted?
Yes, so thanks for putting this amount of work into this. Obviously, the information and data is helpful, especially in this decision as difficult as this one. A couple of things regarding some of this data, right? So, and this is like, it's a little bit related and a little bit not related to specifically what you showed us, but for example, fees is a thing for me, right? So I see that we are requesting an increase in fees. To me, the fee structure is incredibly confusing, right? And it's been a few years since I've been in college. I see that it looks like it's been, there's let's call it expansion in the number of different fees. And so I think it'd be difficult for students to understand exactly what we're saying when we increase fees or not increase fees. So I'm wondering if there's a more clear way we could do that, and also how that compares to our peers. In other words, does everyone have this very complicated menu of fees? And again, there's a separate item here, which I think we should, as a committee and as a board, look to simplify the structure, because I think that's better for everybody involved, but that's a separate point. So that's one thing to address. I'd like you to answer. The other one is regarding the tuition increase per year versus trying to do it over a larger period of time. And I bring this up because I know other schools will do things such as say, hey, listen, when you enter in your first year, that price is the price for tuition, at least, that you're going to get for 4 years. And I think that amount of predictability, certainly I had when I went to school, again, maybe it's not done as much now, is critical to our segment of the population. So again, I'd like to know whether that's something that's being entertained here by System Office or by you, CFO Blanchard, and or again, whether our peers are doing this. Because this, certainly the circumstances that are around this year's cuts are extraordinary, right? But the board always has the ability to change things if they are extraordinary. But I would imagine, hopefully, we don't live in these kind of extraordinary circumstances completely. Unfortunately, maybe cuts are here to stay. Either way, though, amount of predictability that we can provide, again, to our students, I think is critical. And I like to know what plans we have to do that, and or again, whether others are already doing that. The third point, just to file away for another day, why is there such a gap in what our students get for Fine 8? That is a totally different conversation that I think is not apropos to today's conversation. But again, something that as a committee I would like to tackle and understand, because it is not intuitively obvious to me, and obviously it's very detrimental to our students.
Thank you, Regent Yang. I think those were excellent questions. With regard to the simplification of fees, generally, I agree with you. This is a bad practice in the industry where, frankly, to avoid raising tuition as much as universities would otherwise, they try to get resources from other sources. And the way they do it is to create a fee and tie that fee to pay for something very specific, right? While tuition revenues will pay for general costs, fees often are earmarked for specific costs. So I mentioned earlier, the university fee is specifically designed to retire chief debt. The transportation fee clearly linked to transportation benefits. Housing, food services are clear. Registration fee, extension fee. These are fees that are charged for specific purposes. One of the things that makes these fees sort of proliferate is when we get to the program level fees. for the executive MBA or for a business analytics program that have different cost requirements than your traditional social science or humanities program. So you'll see toward the end of the packet and the schedule a long list of program fees that are specific to the specific cost tied to those programs. So while I agree with the simplification of the structure, there is benefit and transparency associated with a specific fee tied to a specific cost line. But as it relates to the practices in the industry, I've tried to do this. I've tried to simplify fees at almost every university I've worked at. And one of the worst, so I've done this research in my history, one of the worst is Ohio State. For what it's worth, you may want to look at Ohio State's admission page and see the full range of fees they have. It's unbelievable. But that's, I would say, an outlier. I would agree that we should work on trying to simplify our fee structure and tying it more closely to the activities that we want our students to have, and therefore we find a way to pay for. As it relates to the tuition point you made, Regent Yang, I think what you were describing is something called cohort-based tuition, whereby what we do at CSU right now, when we raise tuition and fees, we raise them on everyone, existing students and new students alike. It's, from an acquisition cost, you're really hurting yourself when you raise tuition on existing students. The new students may not like it, but at least they know what it is. It's the first time they have to pay it. And under a cohort-based tuition model, you would only raise fees for the incoming class. And then those fees, tuition and fees, would be their number for their 4-year career or however long that career is. UConn does it this way. I imagine there are other universities across the nation, certainly sophisticated research universities, do it this way so that they don't hurt their own retention rate, but still can generate the revenues they need to deal with increases in costs. And finally, and I think you wanted to pass this on to another day, but I agree. Our financial aid for our students is low. And I think it's nothing to do with the state aid or the federal aid, because they are eligible for those every bit as much as, say, a student at UConn would be. But the institutional aid that our institutions are able to provide doesn't come close to other institutions. And that has to do with the general budget picture for our institutions. How much can we afford to pay in institutional aid? We have a statutory requirement to pay 15%. We do that. To go beyond that, we'd like to go beyond that. I think we have been beyond that. But when we face fiscal challenges, we have to manage those resources every bit as much as we manage others. So I would agree, we should find ways to increase our institutional aid to our students.
Thank you. Just to quickly clarify, the 5% that we're being asked to approve, that is the average of the fees that are increasing also?
It's 5% tied to the tuition rate and 5% tied to the university fee and the university general fee.
Okay.
Other fees are, less than 5%, and you could see the specifics in the schedule.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? David, do you have another comment? Please go ahead.
Yes, it's a more general point, and it has to do with something which Lloyd Blanchard presented at the beginning, maybe it was the second or third slide, which is how we got into this situation. And I appreciate, the whole presentation that he's making. It's good to have somebody with an economics background and experience at other universities. And I will certainly be adding sensitivity and elasticity to my vocabulary in future critiques. That said, the issues mentioned, the enrollment decline, tuition and fee decline as a result, the pandemic and the use of some of the one-time funds, state appropriations and fringe costs, those are all true. But the main reason that we are facing a $150 million deficit at the community college and something like a $30 million deficit for FY24 and 25 at Western is one thing, namely students first. And I think, without going into recrimination and finger pointing, which I don't intend to do, about what happened, but we should remember that in 2017, the claim was made that Students First would reduce the cost of the state and improve services to the students. And what we see now is just the opposite. Increased deficit, largely due to the cost of consolidation at the community college level, and overspending of one-time funds to hire, for example, 170 GPAs. And secondly, a side effect of the Students First, which was that the board, now I'm not talking about the members of the current board, but let's talk about the previous board members, did not do one of the essential functions of a board, which is to supervise the presidents of the constituent institutions to make sure that they're balancing their budgets, and Western went off the rails, resulting in that $30 million deficit. Those two factors, the failure, and I'm going to use the term failure, of Students First in terms of its financial objective, and if we look at the cuts of a proposed 770 sections of classes, the services to the students, and the failure to supervise what was going on at Western and apply timely correctives, means that this board and the system office should be assuming their responsibility for the situation that has arisen. And that brings me to the question of the reserves. We've discussed this before. I've brought it up on a number of occasions. It's brought up in the OPM report that was included in the governor's budget, that there is over $200 million in reserves. Now, I understand that we want to keep some reserves, but this is not like the situation of an individual who is supposed to keep 6 months of reserves in case they lose their job. We're not going to lose 100% of state funding or all students suddenly quit the university. It's not the situation of a bank, which needs to keep some percentage of its deposits on reserve in case there's a run. Given that it is the responsibility of the system office, which put forward a failed plan and failed to supervise one of the institutions in a timely and adequate way, it seems to me that it's not the students who should be paying for that in terms of this fee increase, but additional reserve funds should be used to offset a good part of that FY25 budget. This would also have the side benefit of showing that we are taking responsibility for the mistakes that have been made and not shifting it and the burden of it to the students. So that's my proposal for what it's worth.
David, I would respond this way. I'm going to let Lloyd answer the part about reserves. But, I think it's important we look at, and I think you alluded to, but I want to reiterate it. There's a new sheriff in town. And along with the sheriff, I think we've got a board now, as I look around, that is really willing to work and get themselves involved in what's going on to make sure the budgets are under control, including myself, who I think in the past has been a bit more lax because I was accepting numbers and I was accepting changes that I didn't go into and look hard enough at. This board, and we had a meeting the other day, which showed me that the men and women on this board are interested in what's going on, are interested in make sure that everyone knows what's happening through the word that's now used, quote unquote, transparency. And we're going to try and keep it that way so that you, as an individual and professor at one of the universities, faculty and staff will be aware of where we're headed, how we're getting there. And I think the sheriff is in charge. Will make sure that that happens. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Lloyd, to respond to the reserve issue, which I know you have a response to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your question, Professor Blitz. Reserves, I know it's easy to look at reserves when there's a large pot of money sitting there and saying, use that. But when you have a structural deficit throughout your system, and by structural, I mean where revenues do not increase as fast as expenditures, or let me say it the other way, expenditures grow faster than revenues. When you have that kind of situation and you use cash reserves to sort of cover that hole, you will continue to use cash reserves until it runs out to cover that hole, unless you change the structural nature of your revenues and expenditures. This is what we saw happen for years at Western. We do not want to do that again. And so at the end of FY22, we had some $308 million in reserves. Half of that was designated, which means you cannot touch it. Those designations are things like self-supporting programs. If you took the cash from programs that are self-supporting, they would no longer be self-supporting. Debt covenants, reserve requirements. For every time we issue debt, there's always a requirement to have a year's worth of debt service in reserve. And there are other things that compel us to hold money set aside for one reason or another. So those designated funds represent about half of that $300 million. That leaves about $150 million across the system to use in a flexible way. That doesn't represent a lot. It sounds like a lot to the uninitiated, but for an organization that's $1.4 billion, we can see that money can be, lost very easily. In fact, the evidence that it could be lost very easily comes in two forms. One, the declines in enrollments. We saw persistent declines in enrollments that's lasted over a decade. We expect it to continue. That's reason enough to hold on to cash, because we'll be right back here again. Two, the state, as you saw in that appropriation slide, cut us by $116 million. It is possible for our sponsor, the state of Connecticut, to cut us by a large amount, requiring us to use whatever resources we have at our disposal to reset our fiscal situation. So we want to be able to use all levers to try to bring our fiscal budgets into balance. Use revenues, use expenditures, and use cash. Because revenues recur and because expenditures recur, you want to start there. Cash does not recur, so you have to be careful with cash, and you have to use it only as a supplement to more fundamental changes. But thank you for your question. I believe Regent Santiago is next.
Right, Ari?
Well, Dr. Blanchard, you said what I was going to say. So I think the important thing here is we want to be as judicious as we can in raising tuition, yet at the same time, we can't fool ourselves into using one-time cash to solve recurring structural problems. The core foundational principle that will solve our challenge is creating a product and finding students that want it to increase tuition. We've got to have a structural system that is self-sustaining, and I cannot support using one-time cash to cover up a recurring hole. You said it much more eloquently. I just want to provide a lot of support for that.
Thank you for that comment. Any other comments before we vote this resolution by members? Aaron, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up.
That's okay. I've been bouncing back and forth, letting everybody talk about this other stuff. Hi, how are you? Just no surprise, I'm voting no on tuition increases. I voted no before. I'll continue that trend today. I just don't think that it's fair to continuously place the burden on the backs of our students that we serve, that come from my community that I serve, low income, struggling to make ends meet to begin with. Any increase is going to negatively impact their ability to go to school, to remain committed to our institution. We have a fundamental duty to start fixing the structural problems that we have, that we hear so much about. I don't necessarily support using one-time revenues to fix that, because I think there's a lot more problems within this system that need to be ironed out to do that. I just have a problem with continuously putting this on the backs of the students, because this is the third time that I've been asked to raise tuition or fees since I've been on this board. I don't need anybody to belabor the point. Just want everybody to know that I'm voting no and why. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your comments. I would just say that your one-time fees, I don't think there's anybody disagrees with that. And by the way, I would say that the lower income students that you have, many of them receive aid, whether it be through the Pell Grant system, et cetera, et cetera. Do respect your opinion to comment on that. But I think in order to keep programs moving, I think this, as I said before, I think our new chancellor, CFO, and members of this board, which include you, are headed in the right direction to make positive changes, keep things transparent, and to bring things under control, certainly better than they have been in the past, Aaron. So I respect that comment, and it looks like you want to make another comment, so go right ahead.
And when I feel things are working well at our level, then I'll support tuition increases.
Well, I think that's an aspiration for us to achieve, Mayor. Madam Mayor. In closing, I think, Mr. Chair, we really only have two sources of revenue, state appropriations and fees and tuition that we charge to students. When the state reduces their support, we have little other choice.
You're right. And when I first got on this board, actually it was a different board at the time, the state supplied somewhere in the neighborhood of 55%. We are down to like 25% aid from the state as I understand it now. So with that, I would make a motion.
Can I
Chair,
make
Chair
one more
Bell, did
comment?
Oh, well, somebody has a comment.
Yeah, Ted, Regent
Yeah.
Yang has his hand up.
You can see, oh, I'm sorry. You had a comment, Ted?
Yeah, just really quickly, just with respect to Mayor Stewart, I agree with your position, but I will be voting for this and I guess holding my nose while I do it. And honestly, I think the key here is our balance with all the different choices that we make are all incredibly difficult. And we were able to, well, we were the system office and the presidents were able to make a mitigation plan that did not make the kind of drastic, horrible cuts that we didn't want to make, and that we're still 47 short. And that in mind, I don't feel that there's anything that we can do other than vote for this because of that gap. And you know, I think that unfortunately the circumstances, I hear Dr. Blitz out absolutely. I think that a lot of things have changed now in terms of the governance. I hope that they've changed now in terms of the governance of this board and that we don't find ourselves in that situation. But where we're at right now, I respectfully have to say that I disagree in that we need, as much as this has hurt students, and there's no question about it, I don't disagree on that. But that we do, you know, I will have to vote for this because I think this is where we have to go to get us to the next place. And we need to get to that next place so that we can make things better.
Thank you, Ted. Any other comments then? Okay, then I would then make a motion to adopt the resolution, increase tuition and specific fees as presented in the proposed schedule. Is there a second?
Sure. Second.
Thank you. Ted, second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Noes?
No, for the record, Regent Stewart.
Well, the ayes have it. The resolution's adopted. Thank you very much. Before we close, I would just like to wish everybody happy Hanukkah, a Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year, and any other holiday season cheer it brings to each and every one of us. And badly as I feel about this increase, it's something that's necessary. And as I look forward to where we're headed with this board and the chancellor and CFO, I only see positive things occurring. And I hope that is where we're headed into this new year. Thank you very much. With that, I would move adoption, a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Chairman Balducci, I think Board Chair Ryan is looking to say something.
Sorry. You quietly sat there, Madam Chair. Please. You need to be.
Joanne, you're on mute.
You're muted.
You're on mute.
Okay, sorry about that. I really have to applaud your brilliance, your thought process. The presentation, Lloyd, was perfect. We're all on the right track. We know we have a huge road ahead of us, but we are making progress. And I just appreciate all of your time, your efforts, and your thoughts in moving forward and attacking a very, very challenging situation for an institution that is going places and will succeed. But in the meantime, thank you for all your time and efforts and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Lloyd, thank you. I know
Thank
the
you.
hours you put into this, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
now with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Thanks, Ari. Second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Happy
you.
holidays.
Oh, shoot. Lloyd, was he trying to say something? No.
Your live stream is stopped.